Thank you all for joining us for this special edition episode of Back to the Futures. The Futures League community suffered a terrible loss on April 2nd when manager Pete Wilk of the Vermont Lake Monsters passed away after losing a courageous battle with cancer. Pete was a beloved member of the Lake Monsters organization and the Futures League family, and he will be dearly missed. We're honored to present you all with this memorial episode in honor of Pete. We hear from Commissioner Joe Paolucci. We hear from a number of members of the Lake Monsters front office. And we also hear from some players who have been with the Lake Monsters since the start of their tenure in the Futures League: Colby, Brouillette, Tyler Favretto, Jimmy Evans, and Tim Noone. We're really excited for you to hear this episode, and we'll start with Commissioner Joe Paolucci. We are honored to welcome on our first guest here on our Pete Wilk Memorial episode. He is the commissioner of the Futures League. It's Joe Paolucci. Joe, how you doing today?
I'm doing good. Owen, how you doing?
We're doing well. And right off the bat, I just want to ask, Pete joined the league in 2021. That was the first time we all met him. What were your first impressions of Pete?
Um, that he was kind of a larger than life type of personality. I really liked him from the get-go. And I thought, he was a little different than some of the other managers in our league, in that he was a little bit older. Generally speaking, our managers are late 20s into their 30s. And Pete just had so much experience in the college game, and like I said, just his personality was really, I thought, what was going to be a real asset to the league, and how he related with his players and other managers and really everybody within the league.
Yeah, and the league's appreciation for him was clearly on display when you guys announced the Pete Wilk Award, which was actually brought on by Jeff Kleiner, who we talked to later in this episode. But I kind of want to ask you, when Jeff brought you the idea, what were your reactions?
I mean, it was a no-brainer. It was one of those things where I immediately thought, like, yeah, like, why didn't I think of that type of thing? So it was certainly well deserved. Again, like, Pete was only, part of the league for 3 years, but he had such a huge impact. I think was he manager of the year twice. I think he was runner-up another year. His impact was huge, and not only on his players, and that franchise and the fans up there, but even on me. And he had a lot of great ideas for the league. He had a great, his demeanor, the way he presented things to me was, he would almost like kind of make it seem like it was my idea and not his. That's just kind of the guy that he was. So, to be able to name an award after him and have his legacy carry on, similar to the way Adam Keenan's legacy has lived on within our league, I think is great.
And last year, we saw a lot of that support during the Pete Wilk night in Vermont. What were your thoughts on the game, and how special was the game for you?
Yeah, I mean, it was really special. I mean, the fans up there, really took to him, really respected him for the type of man that he was, and what he did for the community up there. So, to see that kind of, outpouring show of emotion, was really special. I know it was for him and for his family.
And we're going to talk to a few players, but Pete had a huge impact on Vermont and the Lake Monsters. What does that show about the Futures League and all the love and support around the Futures League family?
Yeah, I mean, he really implemented himself into the league, with his nature, the way he cared about everybody. Literally cared about everybody within the league. I mean, whether it was, a staffer that worked for one of the teams, you guys doing the podcast, our interns, players, Josh, myself, like, he really cared about everybody. He made it a point to learn about the league and everything that we were about. He was part of our off-season meetings. I'll just say real quick, like, one of the best things, the best ideas that he had, I thought, that's really helped our league, is to push the All-Star game back, a couple of weeks. That was his idea, and really what had been happening was, a lot of kids, their goal was to make the all-star team. And once they made the all-star team, they would go home for the rest of the summer. And, unfortunately, we still had half a season left to play. So, Pete's idea was if we push it back to the end of July, now it's a lot easier to convince kids to stay the last 2 weeks of the season for a playoff push. So that alone really improved the caliber of baseball in the Futures League, because we were able to keep all-star players around, through the end of the season. And that was Pete's idea. Again, it was just another one that seemed so simple, right? But he came up with it, and that's something that we'll always do now for going forward, is have that later date for the All-Star game, and that was all Pete's idea.
Yeah, that's great. And we're going to hear a lot of stories on the show, but it's stories like that where he's just implementing his ideas or doing something to someone that really creates a huge impact.
Yeah. Yeah.
And speaking of impact, I want to ask your perspective as a coach. Pete clearly meant so much to his players, and the players gave him that respect right back. What's the importance of having a relationship with your players like Pete did?
It's everything. I mean, I think it's the difference between being a good coach and a bad coach, really, because when you think about the X's and O's of baseball, I mean, there's, coaches, if you take a coach that's the same age as Pete, they don't know any different drills or know more about the game, right? Like, everybody knows, how to win in baseball. It's all about trying to get your players to play it at a really high level. And so to develop those relationships is the way to do it. You want your players to want to win for you, right? Want to win for their teammates. And, and if you don't build those relationships, it's really, really difficult to have a winning tradition. And that's exactly what he built at Georgetown. And, that's what he built in Vermont in the Futures League. So it really is everything in terms of being a good coach.
Yeah, and that was certainly evident by the amount of returning players that would come back each and every year of his tenure. So that was
For sure.
well said.
Yeah, I mean, Owen, I mean, another great point that you just made. Like, these kids, they want to go to the Futures League, then they want to go to the NECBL, and then they want to go to the Cape, right? But a lot of these kids say, I'd much rather stay and play for Pete and play for a great organization in Vermont. I mean, it's evident you'll know better than me, but there's got to be at least 5 to 10 kids that have stayed for 3 years, playing for Vermont. And that's, again, it has a lot to do with CJ and Chris English as well, and that fan base. But Pete was the anchor up there for that. So yeah, you're exactly right.
Yeah, he was the anchor indeed. Joe, this was a great way to kick off our show. Thank you so much for taking the time and honoring Pete in such a great way.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Owen. Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it.
We want to thank Joe very much for joining us for this episode. He obviously knew Pete as long as we did here since 2021, and it was great to hear Joe's perspective on Pete and what an impact he had in Vermont. Next up, a man who was very directly involved with the hiring of Pete WIlk and the many celebrations that came with Pete WIlk Day, among other things. It's CJ Knudsen, the Senior Vice President of the Lake Monsters. Here's CJ. We are joined by CJ Knudsen, the head of the operation in Vermont. Sir, how you doing today?
Doing wonderful. Really appreciate you guys having me on the show here today. It means a lot to us. And again, I wish we never had to do this, but Pete was just tremendous, literally from top to bottom. Wonderful.
And we want to start off with asking you, what was the process like for hiring Pete, and how did you guys know he was the guy?
Really, Chris English was the one that found Pete, and I think he gave Pete a bunch of different opportunities that I think Pete declined. And then once Chris ended up purchasing the Vermont Lake Monsters, he reached back out to Pete again, and I think Pete realized, like, wow, all right, well, this might be interesting and fun, and spending the summer in Burlington, Vermont. It's a beautiful place up here in Vermont, and he has 2 young girls and his wife Erin, and they joined us 2021 coming out of COVID, and they literally fell in love with Vermont, and they've been here ever since for the summer. And so that's kind of how it all started. That's the first time I met him, was on a cold winter day, right around February or so. He drove up and got a chance to shake his hand and meet Pete for the first time.
Yeah, that's great. And it's, yeah, you mentioned Chris English found him. We'll be talking to him on the show as well. and it's just great to that he got hired. And one thing that we talked to multiple people about was how he really bought into the culture in Vermont. So how do you feel like he changed or helped promote the culture of the lake monsters in Vermont?
Well, a big thing he did was, brought back the championship here. 2021, we had 67 different guys play for us. Nobody really knew the reaction of coming out of COVID, coming into a market that wasn't affiliated baseball team for years. And one of the best things ever happened was joining the Future League. And so Pete was one of the main keys in the cog to make that happen. And our fans fell in love with Pete. He became a fan favorite. And he was wonderful. He was wonderful dealing with the players and making sure that they're good role models on the field, off the field. The baseball instruction that he'd provide made these guys better baseball players, so that when they rejoined their college teams in the fall, there was noticeable difference. The umpires incredibly respected Pete on the field. And in the community, he's beloved. And everyone in our front office interacted with him on a daily basis. I was fortunate enough to not only work with him with the Vermont Lake Monsters, but also become a close friend of his. And so it's one of the great things about baseball is it brings people together and brings community together. And Pete was the straw that stirred the drink and made it all happen and come together.
And you, along with many other people, just mentioned his impact on his players. What did you see from him and his impact on the players, and how it helped your players grow both on and off the field?
Really, his passion for teaching the players and being around the kids, his passion for baseball, and ultimately his work ethic. He made sure that he worked incredibly hard, and he expected the same out of the players on the field, and that paid dividends. On the field, off the field. It's definitely more than just baseball. It's about being a good human being, and Pete was all about that. And that's one of the things I'm really going to miss most about Pete is the conversations that he and I would have. In his office. On the field, off the field, on the phone, getting random text messages about the weather forecast in Vermont, on game days, and trying to figure out the weather clouds and patterns. And it was great. And just having him drive his white Jeep Wrangler, into the ballpark and stopping and then saying hello and talking and giving me a laugh and hopefully making him laugh a little bit as well.
Yeah, Pete certainly had a way of making people laugh, that's for sure. And to follow up on everything you just said, we've asked kind of everybody to tell their best Pete WIlk story. So I'd like to hear yours if you got one.
Yeah, I guess I've got a lot of them, but the one that I love, and this was actually one of the last text messages I said to him was, his nickname that I gave him was Hollywood in 2021 because we're very fortunate. We get a lot of media coverage up in this market by all the TV stations, so NBC, CBS, ABC, Fox, radio stations. I mean, it's just great media coverage in this market, and so I have countless photos of Pete getting interviewed at random times that I was fortunate enough to snap, and he would always laugh and look at me, and I always call him Hollywood from really that day forward. And that was our little chuckle. That he would call me Thor in return, since my nickname years ago was given to me, was called Thor. So he would call me Thor and I'd call him Hollywood. So so one of the last texts that I sent him was a picture of him getting interviewed and saying that we love you, Hollywood.
That's great. That's awesome. And one final question for you, and it relates to one of the best days last summer, which was Pete WIlk Day at Centennial Field in Burlington. Just an incredible showing of everybody wearing the jersey with WIlk on the back and the number 45. How did that day come together, and what was that you? Did that come from the players? Who kind of orchestrated that day?
Yeah, when Pete sent us that text message, which I'll never forget, back in the January of, I guess, 2023, that he had some issues and he wanted to let us know about it. And so from there, we got together as a front office staff and figured out a way to try to help raise some funds, help raise some awareness for Pete and his family, and really just recognize him and his family as just incredible people that they are. And so we wanted to kind of create a night. So we did a dig in for Pete night. We created bracelets that people could buy for $5 with the proceeds go to benefit Pete WIlk family directly. We made the custom jerseys that we auctioned off with the proceeds went to benefit him as well. We ended up raising about $20,000 that night. And it was just a tremendous evening. You know, his family really appreciated it. But at the end of the day, we really appreciated doing it for them. The fans really got behind it. Pete's friends and networks and connections and all the teams in the league got behind it. You know, Westfield made a $1,000 donation on that night. So we were playing the Westfield Starfires. And so it just really brought everybody together. And it was a great way for us to recognize Pete and to pay homage to him and raise some funds and raise some awareness about the very courageous battle that he fought for 15 months.
Yeah, and that's great to see everybody coming together. You talk about the Futures League family, and nobody valued family more than Pete. So it was a fantastic night, and just a great thing that you guys did. It was great.
Yeah, no, it's one that I'm going to remember forever. And the day that he came in, coming up here, we walked on the concourse. It was in the middle of the game, and it was great to be able to just hug him and see him and see his family and have them back at the ballpark. I mean, that's what we wanted. You know, we wanted his family and Pete to be, at the yard and watching the game and being back with the fans and being back in our community.
Yeah, it was a fantastic day, and we're certainly going to miss Pete around the ballpark.
Yeah, I mean, I think Pete's always going to grace the diamond at Centennial Field, and I know there's going to be days where I'm going to be there by myself, and I'm going to hear his whisper or his echo, in the stands or in the clubhouse, and I'm looking forward to that day.
Yeah, Hollywood will be around Centennial forever, that's for sure.
He definitely was. He was a true champion.
Indeed, a true champion. CJ, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. This was great. We always love hearing those unique stories about Pete, and that you certainly fit the bill there with those ones. So thank you.
Thank you for having us, and looking forward to seeing you guys at the ballpark this summer.
You too, sir.
Thank you, CJ, not only for taking the time to talk to us about Pete, but also telling us about Pete from a front office perspective and the man and humor that he had. Next up, we have the guy that's been alongside him in the dugout, Matt Fincher, the assistant head coach and pitching coach of the last 3 years of the Vermont Lake Monsters.
We bring on another guest here on our Pete WIlk honorary episode. He is the interim coach of the Vermont Lake Monsters and was an assistant to Pete for many years. It's Coach Matt Fincher. Coach, how you doing?
Doing well, thank you.
And Coach, we want to start by asking, being an assistant to Pete WIlk must have been an experience. And we want you to kind of paint us a picture. So what was it like being an assistant to Pete WIlk?
Well, the story I love to tell is Pete calls me on the phone after he had taken the manager's position and says, and talked to me a little bit about coming up there and helping him in Vermont. And I remember clearly my answer was no. And, and I tried to paint a picture like I had no interest, but he stayed on me a little bit, and he told me how great it was going to be. So in the end, absolutely, he talked me into going up there. And so you go up there with him, and I had known him a little from, our time playing each other. He came down to upstate a couple of times, maybe with Georgetown. And I had also met him out on the Cape when I was coaching out there. And, but, didn't really know him that well. But working with him was great. I found him, tremendous sense of humor, and, found him very easy to work for. He delegated things to me and turned me loose and let me do my thing, so to speak. The memory that I'll always have is how much fun it was. A lot of laughs, just a really enjoyable time.
Yeah, and that's really funny that you the first thing that you said when he asked was no.
Yeah. Well, I had coached summer baseball so many years, and I think at that point there was a piece of me that was ready to be done with some things regarding college baseball, and I think maybe what he did for me was he made me see another side that maybe I wasn't seeing at the time. Previously, obviously, I'd seen it because I love college baseball, but he made me see some things in his own way, and convinced me that, this would be a really good opportunity. And so, yeah, I'm really glad. I mean, that's something I'll always be thankful for, that he literally talked me into it. And yeah, so that's something I'll always be grateful for.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And one thing that is definitely obvious when you're coaching with someone in such close capacity is the way that they had an impact on you both on and off the field. What was Pete's impact for you? Were the things on and off the field that he taught you, or that he taught you about baseball and otherwise?
Yeah, well, I think, and I've had the good fortune to assist numbers of people across my career, and so one of the things that I'm always looking at, and you hear it from so many different people. It's all about relationships. It's all about how you handle the players, communicate with the players, give the players and provide the players an opportunity to trust you. And I, in my opinion, based on my 3 summers with Pete, that is where he really excelled. I mean, I can't, the only person that I've been with that I would place next to Pete in that area is John Schiffner, who managed the Chatham A's for so many years. But the players absolutely loved and enjoyed playing for Pete, and Pete had a way of providing them space, yet at the same time, reeling them in when they needed to be reeled in, and he set the guidelines, so to speak, and the players absolutely responded. I felt like, as a result of what Pete was doing, that the players came ready to go almost every single day, which is really saying something in a college summer situation. So that's the main thing. Also appreciation for how difficult it is, and how wearing it was on Pete in so many ways. Whether we like it or not, there is turnover in college summer baseball, and it's a lot different than it was when I first got into it back in the '80s. And Pete was busy. It seemed to me every single solitary day. Checking on players, talking to coaches, doing things that have to be done if a team is going to be competitive in the Futures League. And so, just a real appreciation for how much effort and energy he put into it.
Yeah, and that's a question we've asked many people that we were going to ask you, but you answered it perfectly, was what he meant to his players. And I think that paints a very great picture of what he meant to all of them.
Yeah, I would. I mean, I'm certain that as you guys talk to people about Pete, and I know you already have, but that's what that everyone is going to say, how much people really enjoyed being around him. I'm sure they'll talk about his sense of humor, but yeah, the way he communicated and worked with players, and showed his love of the game to them, I think is something that you'll find consistent through everyone you speak to.
And Pete was well known for his in-game intensity. What was your favorite example of that?
Well, he said many things that we really shouldn't repeat here. As have I. We all have. But I don't know that I can point to one circumstance, but I do know that there were a couple of times where I found myself in the dugout thinking, am I going to have to go out there and get between him and the umpire? And, how long is this supposed to go on? And what's the decorum here? And, things of that nature. So I remember last year when he got up there, one of the things I told him was, hey, Pete, they got a rule now. You can only go to the baseline now. So don't go flying out there into the middle of the field, like we always have, for the duration of our career. But yeah, I mean, he could, no doubt, he could be intense at times.
And Vermont had the Pete Wilk night. How great was it to be able to celebrate him in the way that they did?
Yeah, that was a really neat night. We had the special jerseys that we auctioned off to help raise money for his family, and we won that night, which is something that I remember. And I could tell that it really touched Pete deeply. And CJ, Chris English, the owner, and the whole organization has been so supportive and will continue to be. And so that's one of those nights, difficult for me to put into words. I don't think I could do it service, to be honest with you, but it was a special night. I think all the players that were there, certainly the coaches that were there, the fans that were there, this is something that we'll remember across our lifespan.
Yeah, we certainly won't forget it. It was an incredibly memorable night for the Lake Monsters, for the league, just to honor a great man and a great coach, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, Coach Fincher, we appreciate you taking the time. It means a lot, and we know how much he meant to you and you meant to him. And it was great to talk to you today about an outstanding man.
All right, well, I appreciate it. I mean, I consider Pete a dear, dear friend, and I think hopefully I've said that, I'll be forever grateful for what he did for me. And, I mean, it's just a tough time, and he battled valiantly, and it just didn't work out. So we'll move forward from here. All righty.
All righty, Coach. Thank you so much again for taking the time. We really appreciate it.
All right, thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much to Coach Fincher, a guy that certainly had many funny stories to tell about Pete Wilk and his time and his composure in the dugout, because when he was in that dugout, he was locked in. There was nobody getting in Pete Wilk's way, for sure. Next up, we have the owner of the Vermont Lake Monsters, as well as the director of baseball operations, Chris English, the man who hired Pete Wilk, and Morgan Brown, the man that helps develop that roster, the championship winning roster in 2021, and the two terrific rosters that followed in 22 and 23. It is Chris English, the owner, and Morgan Brown, the director of baseball operations. Here they are. We are honored to welcome two more guests here on the Pete Wilk honorary episode. The owner of the Vermont Lake Monsters, Chris English, and the director of baseball operations, Morgan Brown. Gentlemen, how are we doing today?
Great. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Of course. And Chris, I actually want to start with you. We talked to CJ earlier on in the show, and he mentioned that you were the one that spearheaded the hiring of Pete Wilk. So I want to ask you, what went into the decision to hire Pete?
Well, originally we tried to hire him when I owned the Brockton Club, and he just left Georgetown. And he said, "No, I need to spend time with my family. I really appreciate the offer." And so fast forward, I guess, whatever the next year, the first year. So the first person I called was actually Morgan, and I said, "Morgan, what you doing?" And he said, "Well, I just finished working on a campaign." I said, "Now you're the new head of baseball operations for the Vermont Lake Monsters. Does that sound all right?" And he said, "Yeah, that sounds good." So next thing was, okay, we need to find a coach. And I immediately remembered my conversation with Pete. And so I called him, and he's like, Burlington. Now that's interesting. So let me talk to Aaron. Let me talk to my daughters. Let's have a conversation around this, and I'll get back to you. So that was that was sort of the original outreach.
Yeah, and it was clearly a match made in heaven. And Morgan, I want to know, what were your first impressions of Pete when he first started with the organization?
Well, I think how much he really cared about the organization. As Chris just said, I think Pete had multiple opportunities. He'd been a long time, very highly admired coach, and so I think for him to make the move to Vermont, he was all in. He really committed. His family became part of the community. And I think that's what really stuck out, was Pete's commitment to the whole enterprise right from the beginning. I remember actually Chris and I met him up in Burlington, I think when there was still snow on the field, and sort of did a walk around. Centennial is a beautiful place, but Chris and the ownership group up there has obviously been working on doing some things with the ballpark. So talked about some of the vision for what it could be. And I think you could just see Pete's eyes really light up and buying into, what the summer could be, despite the challenges. I think we were doing that, Chris, in March of 2021 or April of 2021, and the season started in May. So, we knew there were some challenges, but I think, he was certainly part of that original group that bought into the idea this could be successful.
And we know Pete loved Vermont, but we know his family also loved Vermont as well. How much did it mean to his family to be up in Vermont with him?
They had their little perch right behind first base, and they'd be there, and the girls would be there. Vermont just embraced their family in such a great way, and Vermonters are pretty friendly that way, and when it became, obviously very supportive when we were winning the championship, the town went crazy, and it was great. But then when it became clear next year that Pete was battling his illness, the degree of support from the town, the people, the host families, the fans, was just remarkable. And we'd be remiss not to mention that the GoFundMe page is still live on our website, to continue to help, as the community did last year. So Morgan, you probably have some thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things Pete and I would obviously talk quite a bit in the off season as the roster was coming together, and it was his daughters really that would always keep us up to date on how many days it was until the start of the season. They had a countdown list back home, just in outside of DC, and so I think that gives you an idea of, it's possible that as much as we said Pete had bought into the whole experience, that it was really it was a family operation, and those off season calls with Pete, I think, proved that.
Yeah, it was really nice to see the love and support from Burlington and around the Futures League towards Pete. And Morgan, you brought in many players from Georgetown. What was it like to have Pete be able to bring in some of his own guys?
Yeah, I think it's most accurate to say that Pete brought in the players from Georgetown. He, especially that first year, as we were saying, we had a pretty late start on putting the roster together. And his personal relationships with those players and with some of the coaches, I think, really enabled us to, get over the hump. I think there's a lot of summer college opportunities out there. This was one that was coming together a little bit later in the game. People were probably familiar with different people in the organization. Certainly Chris has been around baseball for a long time, gives, credibility to the organization, CJ, all the people that were being associated with it. But, Pete's personal connection, particularly with the Georgetown players, but also with a number of his assistant coaches. Pete's got a good coaching tree. I think he did well developing other coaches who've gone on to coach at different programs around the country. And those were, some of the calls that we made, not just that first year, but every year after that.
I mean, if you think about how absurd it was March 15th, and summer rosters are filled the prior August for all teams in all leagues. And the idea that Morgan and Pete could put together not just a roster, but a championship roster, when we also had no staff, by the way, either. So it was really quite a remarkable undertaking and an incredible achievement. But it did speak to Morgan and Pete's incredible network, and the respect that coaches had to send players our way.
Yeah, and Chris, you said rosters. I think that summer was about 3 different rosters that showed up at one point, but what the thing that they had in common, that all of those players had in common, was their love for Pete. And that's been evident by the support that we've seen on social media and with everybody attending his services and whatnot.
Yeah, I'll jump in on that and say, that first year, we went through a number of different players. But every year we've gone through a number of different players, and I've seen outreach and, extraordinary recollections from players who spent as little as, the minimum sort of 7 days with us, talking about the impact that Pete had, the impact that Vermont had on them, and that it was an experience of a lifetime. So, whether it was people who were there for 7 days or people that have been there for the full, the full Futures League existence of Vermont, because we have those players too that have played for us every year. I think, really runs the gamut. But as you said, I think the unifying thing is that Pete had an impact on all those players.
Yeah, he certainly loved all of his players, and they certainly loved him right back. As the audience will hear on this show, but you guys have obviously seen firsthand. And I also want to ask you both about a really impactful day from last season. It was Pete Wilk Day. All the players had 45 on their back in Pete's honor. You guys raised a lot of money in support of Pete. What did that day mean to you both and to the organization to not only be able to celebrate Pete, but to also have him there and present for it all?
You want to go, Morgan?
Well, I hand it over to Chris. Yeah. I mean, the instrumental role that Chris and CJ played in putting that together, I'll hand it over to him. I can add in some color at the end.
Well, it was obviously an incredibly moving day. It was one of those days that you never forget. And he was I'm thanking the fans, thanking us, thanking the players, and it was I don't remember whether we won or lost, but I don't think it mattered. It was it was a celebration of everything that he brought to the community, and the legacy that he's left behind, for sure.
Yeah, I was it was incredibly moving the whole day. I'm not up in Vermont for the whole season, but I went up for that day and got to spend some time with Pete before the game. And Pete he had extraordinary gratitude, I think, for everybody. The journey, certainly first and foremost, his family and the support that they provided, that they've always provided, but also for the ball club and people associated with it, for the community. He was saying, for his doctors, the opportunity to get back up there had been something that he'd thought about a lot. And I just remember him taking time to express that gratitude, and multiple times during the game. And then again, when he was honored on the field and after the game, it was a very, very powerful day.
He was very grateful, and he always expressed that. Even a couple of weeks ago, when we were just texting, just the last thing he'd always say is just, "I'm very grateful for your friendship, grateful for everything." And we sure were grateful and fortunate to have him and his family around. Yeah, it was incredible.
And one final question before we let you guys go. We've heard some great ones, but we want to ask you two, what is your best Pete story?
There's a number of them. This is a tough last question because we could be on for another hour or two. But I'm going to punt and give a couple, because I think, one is that first walk around. Chris and Pete have talked on the phone. There's a concept, there's an idea out there. And then as we're walking around the ballpark and talking about things that could happen and what the season could look like, seeing it take one more step towards reality, and, his input on that. I mean, he's spent time coaching in a lot of the elite leagues, right? He'd coached in Alaska, he'd coached in the Cape Cod League. And I think he was bringing some of that lens to what this club could be. I think, obviously, memories of winning the championship that first year, and, the immediate moments after that. And again, the thing that I think shows up a lot of the time is gratitude. Certainly I have gratitude for being able to have spent the last 3 summers and beyond with Pete. But the gratitude that he had for all the players, for the community, for the ball club, everybody that works at the ball club, that really stood out. But also the fact that he was trying to do things for other people until the final, unfortunately, the final days of his life. He was, regularly, as we were talking about different things, always asking if he could do anything for me, do anything for my family. And I think that's what sticks with me is, Pete trying to extend himself on behalf of other people. He certainly did that on behalf of the players regularly. But that's a story that'll definitely stick with me.
Again, there are many. One of them I just told Morgan, I think, over that I'm not going to repeat because it just makes me look foolish. But my other one was after we lost in I guess whatever the year after we won. I've been talking to CJ, and CJ had been back channeling with Pete, and Pete saying, I want a multi-year deal here, and I think I've really. Pete was a negotiator. He was a tough guy, and there we had incentive clauses in our contracts. That if you win the championship, it's $5,000 bonus and all that, and we didn't win, and so afterwards, I'm about 50 feet away, and I yelled at him, "Hey, Wilk, you really want that $5,000? You really want a 3-year deal? You really want to do this?" And then we just sort of hugged and did that. So that was my favorite moment.
Yeah, that sounds like the easiest contract negotiation of all time. But I mean, that's who Pete was, and those stories were a fantastic way to end our conversation here. Morgan and Chris, thank you guys so much for taking the time out of your busy schedules to speak with us today. We really appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you both for taking the time to honor Pete.
Thank you to Chris and Morgan. And I mean, if that doesn't show what kind of an impact he had on the front office and the players, I don't know what does. Chris clearly saw something in him when he hired him, and Morgan worked side by side with him to create that roster and make it happen in Vermont. So that's great. Next up, we have someone who is very famous around the Lake Monsters, not only the locker room, but the fans. It's Freda Tutt, the host family coordinator for the Lake Monsters, someone who loved Pete and showed that much in the way that she spoke about him and loves her team and her Lake Monsters family. You guys are going to love this one. Here's Freda Tutt. We are now joined on this special episode of the podcast by Freda Tutt, who is the host family coordinator for the Lake Monsters and also a big fan of the Vermont Lake Monsters. We're happy to have her on. Freda, how you doing this morning here?
Doing well. It's a little chilly in Vermont still, but we're doing well.
Yeah, we're inching closer and closer to the summer, but for now we still have to deal with the cold.
Yes.
Yeah, we're happy to have you on. This is a really we're excited to be doing this episode and happy to have so many people on who meant so much to Pete.
Thank you. It's great to be here because Pete was a special man. So,
and just to start it off, we just want to know, what were your interactions with Pete like?
I first met Pete when he came up to kind of get the lay of the land about joining the Lake Monsters. And, we sat down and he said, "You're going to be able to house all my players?" And I said, "I'm going to house every one of your players. They will be in a host family." He said, "That's what I want." He said, "I want them having a great host family experience." So Pete and I worked really closely together throughout the time he was in Vermont on the, making sure players felt safe and secure and happy in their homes, and making sure that, that he was getting good players too. So.
Yeah, we know how much his players loved him. It's clear how much he loved his players, and that's great. That, that was the first thing he said to you. He goes, make sure the guys are taken care of. That's great.
Yeah.
And you certainly embody what it means to be in the Lake Monsters community and the Lake Monster culture. And I want to ask you, what did Pete bring to that culture when he joined the team in 2021?
Gosh, hard to quantify. So much. He created a community that was vibrant. He made sure that the lake monsters, represented themselves well in the Vermont community, in the Burlington area, and that the community would grow to love those players, even more so, I think, than they did when we were affiliated baseball. So it was he really cared about making sure that the community had access to the players. Whether it be, hey guys, I don't care if you just lost, sign some autographs after the game. So he really rallied the community around the players and the players around the community.
Yeah, that was certainly evident by the way that they came out in droves for the Pete Wilk game and for other celebrations that he was a part of. And of course, the multiple championships and championship appearances that you couldn't hear a thing in that place.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah. It was so electric there that I've never felt that at Centennial. And I've been going to games at Centennial since 1995.
Yeah, and that transitions into my next question perfectly, which is you work with the team, but obviously you're also a huge fan. What were the interactions like between Pete and the fans, and how did he keep them involved and keep them interacted in the game?
He was accessible. That's the one thing I think is the biggest word I can think of, is he was accessible. When he came out of the clubhouse, if someone was standing there, a fan was standing there and saying, hey coach, he would absolutely go over and say hello to them, greet them, talk with them, excuse himself nicely when he had to get out on the field, but he was always accessible to the fans, which is, I think, a huge part of becoming part of the community. And his family was equally. Erin was the same way, that, if people would come up to her when she was sitting, watching the game, she would talk to people every day. It's not like they were an elite group. They were part of us.
Yeah, that's so great. And I feel like that's also so rare now with not really in our league. I feel like a lot of coaches are very accessible, but it's rare to find a coach that will take the time to interact with fans because they're so locked into the game. But it's great to know and to see that Pete was involved not only in the game, but in kind of everything going on around it with the fans and what the Lake Monsters had to offer each and every game.
Yeah, he definitely was.
And we've already mentioned it a few times of how loyal Lake Monsters fans are, either in the game or during the off season. What were the fans' first impressions of Pete when he joined the Lake Monsters?
They loved him immediately. He is so personable. I had a player when we were affiliated that had been coached by Pete at Georgetown. And when he found out that Pete was coming to Vermont, he's like, oh my gosh, you're getting one of the best. He will fit into the community. He will make himself part of the community. The fans, the players, everybody are going to love him. So it was immediate that he was part of the community.
And they loved him right back. We talked to him multiple times on this podcast for championship specials and all-star specials, and his love for the community was big. And he was so happy to be here. And we talked to Coach Fincher earlier, and Coach said that he had kind of had to Finch said he had to be dragged up here by Pete because Pete was like, you have to experience this with me. And it just it shows. It shows.
Yeah. Pete definitely loved it here, and his family, I don't know if Pete loved it more than his family did or if the family loved it more. I mean, the girls especially were, a big part of everything at the ballpark, and I hope they continue to be.
Yeah, we certainly hope so too. And Freda, you've been wonderful so far. We've got one final question for you, and I think it's one that says a lot about Pete. How did Pete make such a big impact on the Lake Monsters in such a short amount of time?
It's who Pete is. It's how he's been, through his whole coaching career, college career. Pete really genuinely cared about people. He really cares about relationships. He values relationships. He holds on to them. He fosters them. And I think that type of individual really, makes themselves a real place in a community like Pete did.
That is a fantastic answer. Could not have said it better myself.
Thanks.
Freda Tutt, the host family coordinator for the Lake Monsters, thank you so much for taking the time and speaking with us today. He meant so much to the community and the fans, and it shows based on how you answered those questions today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Of course.
Thank you, Freda, for not only showing us the passion that Pete had for Burlington, Vermont, but also the Lake Monsters culture. Up next, we have Jeff Kleiner, who's the Futures League crew chief.
We're honored to bring on our next guest here on this honorary Pete WIlk episode. He is the crew chief for the Futures League and has certainly had an interesting relationship with Pete. It's Jeff Kleiner. Jeff, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for inviting me, and I'm honored to be part of this.
Absolutely. We're honored to have you. And just right off the bat here, what was your relationship like with Pete?
Pete and I became pretty close right off the bat his first year up in Vermont. We had a mutual respect for each other, and I think that's partly, or it came in because of his experience at a major college level, and my experience at the major college level, as well as working in the minor leagues, that we both understood the game, and we both understood what the purpose of summer ball was. And he was, obviously his experience, he knows how tough the job is, which it's extremely difficult, even at the summer ball level. There's, there's some pressures there. But he just let us do our job. And we became, I always appreciated that. And we have a lot of guys in the league that are like that. He's not unique to that. We have quite a few. This league is phenomenal. I have the opportunity to work in many leagues over the summer, and I have chosen to put my roots down with this league and work it as a full-time deal and prop it up as much as I can around the country. I think it's the most unique, and I actually prefer working here than I do in the Cape. So our relationship, it just became, baseball guys. And then my dad also, not the same type of cancer, but I lost my dad when he was 48. So I've been through this with other family members, and once that became known, we became much closer. We spent a lot of time talking in the off season.
And for those who may not know, what's umpire relationships like with managers normally, especially in a league that only has like 8 teams and you see the same 8 managers every game? What's it like the day to day?
For the most part, especially at the summer level, and I consider this a higher level baseball. Everybody has a lot of experience and understands the game and understands what each role is. So the relationship with managers is professional on the field. I was real close to Pete, but I wouldn't be afraid to throw him out of a game if I had to. And he knew that. And it was a few times I had to reel him in. But in this league, it's not normal. It's not normal for an umpire to have a relationship like this with a manager. But this is a unique situation in a unique league. I've said to Joe, and all of the owners know that I truly believe this is one huge family that spends the summer together. It's a long season. Every night, a lot of us are traveling. Not necessarily that, there's a few nice close trips, but there's some travel. So I think everybody really appreciates each other. So our relationships in this league is phenomenal.
You talked about not being scared to throw managers out. Do you have any funny stories about having to run Pete or being close to ejecting him?
I never had to actually eject him. I had to protect him from getting thrown out last year in Nashua. It was actually one of his first travel games when he came back. I had him his very first game back, which I didn't know he was going to be there. He down in Norwich, and I walked through the tunnel, and lo and behold, there he was. And I'll be honest, it was emotional. wasn't expecting him. Later in the season, Chris Richards, one of the coaches up in Burlington, drove Pete down for a morning game to Nashua. And I had a kind of a fill-in guy that wasn't super experienced, and he was out of position on a play, and I was the plate umpire. I had to make the call from the plate on a play at second base, which should never happen. And that's one of Pete's things. He's okay if you miss a call, if you miss a pitch, but if you're not in position, that'll set him off, and rightfully so. And he was pretty hot. And I let him have his say, and tried to do my best to get him away from my partner, and ended up having to bear hug him and literally telling him, Pete, please don't make me do this. Please don't make me do this. And he wouldn't stop. I mean, he was fired up. And I was able to get close enough to the dugout to get Finch to come out and get him and save him. And because it was early in the game, so that would have been a long drive down for a few innings. And we talked about that play or that situation ad nauseum actually over the last year. We became texting buddies. Was one of those things that kind of kept him going. That's all he could do was really just sit and watch TV and text and so forth. And we talked about that play quite a bit. And I got him laughing. Don't know if you're aware or anybody shared with you, but 3 weeks ago now, 4 weeks ago, my wife and I actually flew down to visit him at his home. Because of some of the conversations that we were having, I got a real good sense of what was really going on. And worked it out with Aaron to make sure they were going to be home, and it was a surprise visit type of a deal. And walked in his living room, and he just started crying, which was great. And we talked about that play, and Aaron said, that's the first time I've seen him laugh in a long time. That was great.
That's great that you got to see him. Talk a little bit more about that, what that trip was like, kind of seeing him, as you said, just a few short weeks ago.
Yeah. So, like I said, he told me a lot of private things that weren't public, via text. We talked once or twice, but it took a lot of effort for him to talk. He loves to text. And some of the things that he was telling me, and I was able to read between the lines, I got a real good idea that I probably wasn't going to see him opening night, which we had been planning and looking forward to, and heading over to the whiskey room afterwards for a beverage. So, I mean, right up to the very end, he absolutely in his heart thought he was going to be in Vermont opening night. Already had his house, the house all situated, and was not going to give in to the news that he got from his doctor a week earlier. So my wife, I told my wife I was going down, and she actually travels with me to Vermont. She absolutely loves it up there. It takes a couple of vacation days, so to speak, and we look at it as get a weekend getaway that that the league pays for. By the time all the expenses come out, it's a wash. But we really enjoy going up there. So she had seen the experience up there and knew how much I had been talking to Pete. So she goes, I want to go too. So it threw me off. I said, well, okay, great. So we flew down on a Saturday, early Saturday morning, and went over to the house and spent 4 or 5 hours with him in his living room with his beautiful family. His 2 girls were there, and that's a lot of the first couple of hours was just talking about his girls. He just absolutely adores them, and he was fighting like heck to be there for him. And some of the conversations that we had, because I have 2 young daughters, well, not young anymore, they're grown and gone, but I also raised 2 daughters, so he was always asking me for advice and so forth. And so we just sat there. His daughter Casey is a lacrosse player and desperately wants to play Division I lacrosse at Virginia. And Virginia had a lacrosse game on the TV, and we all just sat there and watched the game with his daughter, and talked here and there, let him rest here and here and there, and then he would kind of perk up, and we'd talk baseball again, and in life in general. So it was, I'll never forget that trip. when we left, when we got back to the hotel that night, I just told my wife, thank God we came, because we could see what was happening.
Yeah, and that's so great that you got to visit him and kind of and see him, and of course he's talking about his daughters in baseball.
Yeah,
yeah.
The whole time was his daughters, and then he was very emotional about the trip multiple times. He said, "I just cannot believe you're sitting in my living room. I can't believe that you did all of this to come down and visit me." Because I live in New Hampshire, so I mean, it was a flight, it was a hotel, it was rental, it was all that stuff. It was worth every single penny.
That's fantastic. And Jeff, this has been great. We've loved the stories that you told so far, but we got one more question for you. Yep. Recently, the Futures League announced the Pete Wilk Award, which goes to someone who shows incredible perseverance on and off the field. And that idea for the Pete Wilk Award was yours. So I wanted to ask you where that idea came from and what made you bring it to our doorstep.
So I had thought about it for a little bit. And it all kind of came together when we were up in Vermont on one of the trips this past season, in the Dig In campaign, and the fact that he didn't let on how sick he was and just fought through it. I mean, he was much sicker than you would believe, not knowing him closely, and he just wanted to fight for those kids. And I happened to be watching that around that same time, one of the reruns of the Jimmy Valvano situation and that award. And then basically a light bulb went off. And I'm like, this is exactly, this guy, the perseverance he's putting up, the commitment he's had to these young student athletes, which is unbelievable. He has molded more lives than you could possibly even imagine. And then I was thinking about, and forgive me, I forget his name, the young man from Worcester who broke his leg last year, who nobody thought was ever going to play baseball again, and came to throw a first pitch out, a month after that horrific injury, and ended up continuing to play. So it came to mind, that's the type of kid that, just fights through everything and should be recognized. And I'm like, this should be an award for Pete. In the back of my mind, I knew, because of our conversations and the visible things, that it wasn't going to be long that we're going to have him. So I had asked Joe. I called Joe one day and asked him about it. He's absolutely, that sounds like a great idea. And I didn't hear anything more about it until the league meeting day. And lo and behold, it was presented. I wasn't aware that it was presented as my idea. I wasn't looking for any credit or anything. I just kind of wanted to have his name recognized for the remainder of the league's existence, which I hope is hundreds of years. And it was unanimously supported. And that was actually one of the reasons that, kind of backtracking a little bit, one of the reasons I ended up going down to visit him, because one of our conversations, I had let Pete know that it was coming, but it wasn't public for quite a while. And he was floored, absolutely just could not believe that this was being done. And one of our conversation was, hey, do you know when they're going to announce it publicly? I'd like to let my family and so forth know. And I said, I believe it's, another week or so. And then a couple of days later, he followed up and was like, all right, it'd be great. I really want to be able to share it with everybody, and sooner rather than later. So that was a trigger point that I knew something was going on, and we talked later, and that's when he told me he got the news from his doctor about the treatments and so forth. So I called Joe and filled him in, and lo and behold, 2 days later it was announced. And I'm glad it was announced where he could actually see that it was announced. Very grateful to Joe and the whole staff and the whole league for that.
Yeah, we can't wait to have that award for years and years and years to come. And his name will always be synonymous with it. And it's great for the league. And again, thank you for bringing that idea to our doorstep, because that's great.
You're very welcome. Very welcome.
And Jeff, this has been a fantastic interview. So many great stories about such a great man. We appreciate you taking the time today.
Thank you very much. Again, I'm super honored that you invited me and get to talk about my friend. I'll miss him.
We will too. Thank you, Jeff.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much to Jeff. And we always love those stories between managers and umpires, but it's certainly different to see that relationship off the field, how it kind of developed on the field and went beyond that. Next up, we begin the players portion of this podcast. We start with Colby Brouillette, who has been there since 2021. He is back for 2024. He's a guy that lives and breathes Lake Monsters and has as much passion for the team as Pete did. Here's Colby. We are honored to bring on our first player here on the WIlk Memorial Show. It is a guy who is well known around the Lake Monster community as much as Pete Wilk is. He's been there as many years. It's Colby Brouillette. Colby, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
We're doing great, man. And right off the bat, we've heard a lot of stories already on this show, but one in particular that I want to ask you about was a story that you actually told on the news, and it was about Pete checking up on you, not Lake Monster related. Would you mind relaying that story for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So after my 4 years at Clarkson, I was looking to do a grad transfer, and Coach Wilk set me up with a visit at Central Connecticut State University, the school where I'm currently at. And after the visit, I sent him a text, saying, "Hey, the visit went great. Let me know when you have a minute to chat. I'd like to talk with you on the phone. Just tell him how the meeting went." And he calls me about 30 seconds later, and he's like, "Hey, CB, how'd the meeting go?" And I was like, "Coach, you got time right now?" And he's like, "Yeah, I'm getting treatment, but I got a minute. How'd it go?" And I couldn't believe it, but that's just the person who he was. He always put others first, before himself, no matter what he had going on. And he always had my back, and, was supporting everyone else as well.
Yeah, that's great. And that based on what we've heard all day and based on what me and Matt know, that certainly embodies who Pete was for sure.
And we've also heard that Pete has a way with nicknames. We wanted to hear some of the ones that he gave you and what was his best ones that he ever had.
Yeah, so my nickname amongst the Lake Monster community is the Green Flash. I found these like neon green, almost kind of matches this green color cleats, and I was like, "Hey, those would look good with the Lake Monsters uniform." And nobody else had them. They were flashy, they were very bright, and I always told Coach Wilk that I was the delayed steal king, and he didn't necessarily believe me because of my size at first, which is fair. But so I got on first. I don't know what game it was, and he gives the signs to the third base coach, and I'm not even looking at the third base coach. I'm just dead eye staring him in the dugout, trying to let him give me the delayed steal, and he gives it to me, and I was safe. And I looked back in the dugout as soon as I got up, and he was just cheek to cheek, grinning, smiling. And when I got back in the dugout, he was like, "Man, see that green flash out there?" Because of my cleats, and the nickname just stuck. So, not the fastest guy for sure, but the green flash is what he came up with for me.
The Green Flash. That's great. That's awesome. And a lot of people have talked about his impact on them within the organization, and of course, you guys, the players. But I want to ask about the community. What impact did Pete have on the community in Burlington and Lake Monster fans in general?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. And I think going back to the night we had for him where we all were wearing Wilk jerseys, number 45, all the fundraising and all the proceeds that went to that, I think that speaks volumes, specifically about the Lake Monster community. All the players obviously had his back. We were wearing the jerseys with the last name on it, but the community really showed up and really supported Coach Wilk. I think it was over $10,000 that was raised that night. Don't quote me on that number, but it was a substantial amount of money. And I believe there were local organizations that also donated money, to help him, like Casella. And I think there was one other company, I don't exactly remember, but So not only, you know, the fans, but the Burlington community, like you said, we're all there rooting for Pete. And that just speaks to, you know, who he is as a person, not just a baseball coach.
Yeah, that speaks volumes. And the Pete Wilk night spoke volumes. We wanted to ask you about that as well. You talked about it from a community perspective where everyone came together from him, but I want to ask about it from a player perspective. You're on the field, you know, you've been a player to this man for since 2021. You're wearing his jersey on your back. What did that mean to you as a player and to your teammates, to your brothers, to be part of that experience for Pete?
Yeah, no, it was a very, very special night. I kind of compare it to the Jackie Robinson Day when all the MLB guys wear 42, you know, to honor Jackie. And just to have that kind of representation, you know, of our coach, it meant the world to all of us, you know, and thinking back specifically to that game, I hit a double and you know, normally I have my own double celebration, whatever, but I just kind of turned around and showed up my WIlk jersey on the back, flashing it to the dugout because the name on the back meant a lot more than the name on the front in that case. And if you know Miracle at all, it's not normally that way. It's normally the other way around. But that night, for sure, the name on the back was more important than the name on the front. And just to be able to do that, you know, on that night, it was very special to me personally.
And we already mentioned it. You started there in 2021 and you were great in Vermont. And Pete Wilk also helped you get to Central Connecticut State, like you said. But what other impacts has he had on your baseball career?
Pete, you know, it's hard to say in the short time that we have here, but so Pete took a chance on me. Not a lot of people know this, but my first summer there, I just finished off playing in the Perfect Game League. I had a torn UCL. I needed Tommy John surgery, but I still could hit. Coach Wilk knew this, and he still took a chance on me, gave me an opportunity to play, and we were fortunate enough to win the championship. And that specifically, I mean, not the only thing, but that stood out to me, you know, especially being a D3 ball player at the time. You know, his famous records at Georgetown, you know, big D1 coach, for him to take a chance on a hurt D3 player, you know, that meant the world to me. And that's just, you know, that's just the man that he was. You know, he doesn't necessarily look for the best ball players. He looks for good ball players, don't get me wrong, but he looks for better people as well. And just tries to better, you know, everyone's life, you know, develop them into a man, so to speak, but it's true. You know, he was more focused on building you as a person than as a baseball player. And let me tell you, he made you a better baseball player, big time. So
And you couldn't have said it better yourself. You know, that's what the Futures League is all about. But also for, you know, you talk about Pete, you talked about his records at Georgetown. This is a big D1 coach, and he's coming to coach in Burlington, Vermont, where he's moving himself, his family. And again, he's picking you guys like you, guys like Jimmy, guys like Tyler Favretto, who are from very different backgrounds, but coming together for, you know, a great thing in Vermont during the summer. And it obviously ended in the best way possible.
yeah, absolutely. And you know, like you said, doesn't matter the level, it doesn't matter where you come from, whether it's the USA or Canada or any other country, you know. And I'm forever grateful for that. You know, Jimmy and Tyler are my brothers for life now. And you know, I can't thank Pete enough for giving me the opportunity to meet guys like him or guys like them. And many others. You know, those are just two specifically that you named. I could go on and on about, of the different rosters every year.
Yeah.
Guys that I still keep in touch with and, you know, are just great human beings. And that's, you know, again, a reflection of Pete's work.
Yeah, that's great. And we're going to ask each player this, but I want to start with you here. There's a lot of Pete Wilk stories that anybody could tell, but I kind of want to get the inside locker room best Pete Wilk story that you have.
That's a great question. When you're saying locker room, the first thing that comes to mind is kind of his first day speech. So bringing everyone in, um, guys from all over the country, different levels of baseball, probably never been to Vermont before. Um, Pete made it clear on what it meant to be a Lake Monster, to play for the Lake Monsters, to be a part of this community. He really emphasized on back when you were a kid, and this really got to me because I was that kid at Centennial, personally, because I grew up watching the Lake Monsters, but just trying to get the message to everyone. Back when you were a kid, you were asking for the autographs. You were cheering on the Lake Monsters. They don't care if you go 0 for 4 with 4 strikeouts or 4 for 4 with 4 home runs. Like, if you just talk to them, say hi to them, give them an autograph, it'll mean the world to them. And that just kind of that stuck with me. And I knew that was going to be the case, but it didn't hit that hard until it actually happened. When I signed that first autograph, and I was like, wow, this is a big deal. This is special. And I pictured it in my head, but after like stepping back and realizing the difference it makes, really blew my mind. So he really makes an emphasis on, whatever happened on the field happened. Off the field, you have to be a good human being. So that's kind of an in the dugout. It's more serious than I'm sure Jimmy or Tyler's story will be. Another one on the field that I'll never forget is during BP. I don't know what was going on, but something was wrong with my swing. And he's right behind the turtle. And he told me this one like teeny tiny tweak. And I was like, all right, I'll try this out. And then the very next pitch, I hit a home run. And I was like, what just happened? Like, it was like the smallest thing. And he saw it, fixed it. And I got out of the cage after whatever. And I was like, like, what are you, a god? And he was like, that's why they pay me the big bucks. And I couldn't stop laughing. So that was a great story. That was a great day.
Yeah, that's great. And those are two stories that completely embody the man that Pete Wilk was.
Absolutely.
That's great. Colby, that was a fantastic way to kind of kick off the players portion of our show. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on out of your busy schedule. And, we wish you the best of luck this season, man.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Colby, not only for the great stories, but the Green Flash. What a nickname. Next up, we have another player, an infielder since 2021. Here is Tyler Favretto.
We are honored to welcome our next guest here on this Pete Wilk honorary episode. He has played for Pete Wilk for the last 3 years in Vermont. It's Tyler Favretto. Tyler, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How you guys doing?
We're doing great, man. And we appreciate you coming on to talk about an incredible man. And I want to ask you were there front row seat for his first year in Vermont. What were your first impressions of Pete Wilk?
I was a young kid going to Vermont for my first season, and obviously wasn't too familiar with the college life of baseball, and so I was a little nervous going in there. But Pete's first impression, he really settled me down. He really he kind of took me under his wing a little bit and just allowed me to get my feet wet into the college game. He allowed me to just adapt to the new kind of speed of the game. And Pete was he's just a calming. He was good, calming. Great leader. And he did so many things for me and for the organization. Obviously their first year back, and so he was really the right guy for that job to get things rolling and get fans back at the field. And obviously we had tons of success in our first year there, and I think that was a big building block, and continue to get fans to come see our games and keep supporting us. So my first impression of him was he was just a great leader. Obviously he was very knowledgeable. He had great baseball IQ. He knew what to say and how to say it and how to get his message across to us. Obviously we started the season off pretty rough. Our first year, just we had guys coming in and out, and we just had a tough start to the year. And he kept just, mentioning, it's a long season, just keep going, just keep building, relationships with each other, keep plugging away. And then obviously, the success came with that. And so obviously his leadership was probably the biggest thing.
Yeah, you guys, of course, winning that championship in 2021 and coming very, very close the last 2 years as well. And we're talking to you on the show. We've also talking to Jimmy Evans and Colby Brouillette, 3 guys that have been there since day one. What does it mean to kind of continue to build that relationship with Pete by going back each and every year?
It's amazing, every single year after we got done, he kept saying that he wants us back the year after. He always said that he can't picture coming to Vermont and coaching without us there, and that means a lot to us. Obviously, we built a pretty close connection with Pete, and just by, on the field and also off the field, we were always able to talk baseball, but on the side, we're always able to talk about our families, just talking about how, his family was in from Virginia for the whole month of July. And I just kept on asking, what'd you guys do yesterday? I remember him asking me one time, since, Montreal is pretty close to Vermont. He kept asking me about, he's been wanting to go visit. And so he kept asking me for, hey, what should I go see? When, just different sites to see, different places to visit. And so as long as, we were talking baseball, there's also the life aspect of it. And it meant a lot for us because it allowed us to show up to the ball field, knowing who we were playing for. And it was always easy for Colby, Jimmy, and I to, come back and play for him.
And we've talked about him being a great leader and a great guy and could talk to him about anything. But we've also heard that he's had a sense of humor. Do you have a favorite story or moment about Pete?
There's so many to try to pick one, but you know, he would always come up with the best nicknames. I mean, I don't know how he does it. He is probably the best one that I can ever think of, just coming up with nicknames. I know on the lineup cards, I was just used to seeing last names up there, and there's one time where I went to look at the lineup card, and I think 1 through 9 had all nicknames to them, and I was like, who is hitting the 4 hole today? Who is Green Flash? And then I look out into the field, and Colby's wearing some green cleats, and next thing I know, I go, oh, I guess Colby's hitting in the 4 hole tonight. So obviously, at one practice too, or one BP day, Jimmy had some white cleats, and it turned out that he was now called the Milkman just because of his white cleats. So it was him, and his nicknames were probably the funniest thing that I can think of.
And you talked about him talking about baseball and all that and how great of a leader he was. A lot of things that we know about him is his composure in the dugout and his leadership in the dugout. What was it like just being on a field with him during a game, and how did he help you throughout the game?
Like you said, he was very composed, very even keeled. The score can be 10-0 for us, and we can be ahead or we can be losing by 10. His composure would be the same throughout. He'd be very even keeled. He'll be, we get a big hit at a big time. He'll show a little bit of emotion, but it's nothing too crazy, nothing too, showboating or nothing like that. He was very even keeled. And I think it allowed players to realize that, baseball is a game of failure. You're going to have a lot of ups, you're going to have a lot of downs. So keeping that even keeled, that mindset of, just stay on this level will allow us to be successful. I mean, um, he would, he would make sure to get his point across, whatever needed to be done. Say someone, he thought someone didn't do something right, he would make sure that's expressed in a way that that player will learn from it. He won't really get on them, but he makes sure that his point will get across so that they can learn. Because obviously he still wants them to develop for when they go back to their school the following year, that they learn something from the summer that they can apply. But his composure was amazing. Like I said, just playing for a guy like that, just knowing that if it's game 1 of the season or it's game 3 of the finals, it's just another game. So it was very, very easy to play for a guy like that.
Yeah, that's great. And you mentioned earlier, you talked about the life aspect of Pete. You know, he's a great guy on the field, but I want to talk about off the field. What was his relationship with you and the rest of your teammates off the field? We heard a pretty good story from Colby about him checking in on him when Colby was in the portal. So I just want to see if you kind of have any other stories of him outside of baseball, outside of the Lake Monsters.
Yeah, we had a bunch of stories. I know when his family used to come up, bunch of, you know, how Vermont weather is sometimes, how crazy it is with all the rain that we get. And so we had to pull tarp a couple mornings in a row, just to make sure that, you know, the field wouldn't get too wet. And his daughter would bake us cookies all the time, and it was probably one of the favorite things. He'd always text me, and he'd always say, "Hey, make sure you're at tarp pull. My daughter's got some cookies, fresh cookies for us." And so that used to be just one of the examples I can bring up was just he would always just make a little jokes about kind of, you know, different things. And so that was one memory that I can always think back was he would always let me know when his daughter was making fresh cookies, and I can know if I have one of those cookies, my day is going to be a pretty good day.
Yeah, we talked all about this show about how, you know, Pete really embraced the culture, but his family did too, and they really accepted living in Burlington and the greatness that it was. So that's great. That's great.
Yeah.
And then one final question for you. I want to talk about that last night of the regular season, a really, really great night for the Lake Monsters for the Futures League. You all come out with the Pete Wilk jerseys. Pete's in attendance. The stadium was rocking. It was a great night. Talk about that from your perspective. What did you see? What were the emotions flying through your head? What was it just like to be part of that incredible game?
It was a very special night. I mean, just you mentioning it right now, I got some goosebumps. It's a game that will be stuck with me for probably my whole life. Very special night. I know Colby and I and Wyatt, some of the returners that were there, we took that one to heart. You know, we kind of talked with the players throughout the year about, you know, just trying to give them an example or just telling them how Coach Pete was, just so they can somewhat get the idea of what kind of coach he was, because unfortunately, you know, they weren't able to be coached by him. And so once they saw him in attendance and the impact that he had, not just on us, the players, but the community and the fans and the management, it really showed to them. I think it was very eye-opening to them, and they realized how much of an impact Coach Pete had on the organization. And so, you know, we were very happy to go out and play a very hard game for Pete in honor of Pete. Pretty sure we got to win that night for him. It was incredible. The organization, the whole league was behind us that night. I'm pretty sure we played the Starfires that night on Pete Wilt night when we wore his jerseys, and they obviously, I think, made a donation, and then everything, you know, they were just so very classy, and I tip my cap to them for what they did for Pete that night too. And so it was a great night. We had so much fun playing for him. It was so nice for him to be back there, obviously, with all the battling he was dealing with and going through all the struggles that he had to go with, and just allowing him to be just at the ball field watching players he's coached and understanding that he was there. And I hope he understands that there was a big impact for Colby and I, and all the other returners that were there, just to see him back there, because obviously we were struggling through that process. We were missing him. We obviously knew he'd rather be on that ball field coaching us than obviously going through what he was going through. And so it was big for us to be playing that game.
Yeah, that's great. And you know, there's no better summary than that right there. That's fantastic. Tyler, thank you so much for taking the time. I know the schedule is crazy right now with being right in the middle of baseball, but we appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you, Tyler. It's great to hear the players' perspective about how much Pete meant to them, and Tyler certainly embodied what it meant when he joined the Lake Monsters in 2021. Another guy that's been there since 2021 is Jimmy Evans, who is now at Duke. He's joined by his teammate Tim Noone in a double interview here. Two guys that certainly loved having Pete as their coach, both on and off the field. Here are Jimmy Evans and Tim Noone. We're honored to be joined by our next guest here on this special episode in honor of Pete Wilk. Two guys that we actually had on earlier this season. Jimmy Evans, who is at Duke, with his roommate, Tim Noone. They are both, on the road, right? At Virginia Tech right now?
Yep.
The hotel.
Yeah, appreciate you guys taking the time to jump on this call. And we want to start by asking about Pete Wilk behind closed doors. What was Pete Wilk like in the locker room?
Yeah. Well, first of all, Pete was just an awesome human being. He's one of the greatest people you'll ever meet. He was a true leader, obviously on the field and off the field. He made sure every player in that Lake Monsters locker room felt comfortable and felt like a good presence just being around. He provided everything you needed as a baseball coach and truly got the most out of every single one of us. And it's a unique characteristic that not every coach frankly has. But Pete was a true leader, just a strong presence in the dugout and in the locker room. And yeah, like I said, made our experience in Vermont absolutely tremendous.
Yeah. When I first saw Pete, I was kind of surprised by how big he was. He's like much taller than me, like almost like an intimidating guy when you first meet him, size wise. And then like all of a sudden you get to know him, you start talking, and Jimmy hit on a lot of the great points, but he's a very serious guy in the dugout and when he's in game mode. But then when he gets off of the game mode and in the locker room, very approachable, somebody that I could always go to talk about coaching, to talk about baseball in general. And I remember mainly either just like popping into his office and asking him situational questions about why would we do this in a certain scenario, when would we go matchup based on the mound. And then, I was always sitting on his end of the dugout. I remember me and Tyler Favretto basically posted up on that manager side of the dugout, just listening to his thoughts and talking to the other assistant coaches about like what decisions to make. So true, like great baseball mind, very approachable. I feel like I learned a lot from him, definitely became a better baseball player because of him. And obviously like an A+ human being in all aspects of the game.
Yeah, and another point I just want to add about Tim saying about how serious Pete was when you first meet him. Like my first impression was like, okay, this guy is an unbelievable baseball mind, really serious. Let's figure out how to crack him, like make him laugh. I remember me and MJ Metz for the first like 2 weeks that I was in Vermont in 2021. We were just like trying to, poke the bear a little bit, see if like he can make him laugh. And we finally did it. And then once you make him laugh, it was like a whole different side of Pete. He has an unbelievable sense of humor and really fun to play for.
Yeah, I remember my first impression of him. We went up for the first Lake Monster game, the home opener, and I'm interviewing him, and I'm expecting like coaches to talk a little bit. And I go, "Hey Pete, like how you feeling opening day?" He goes, "Outstanding," and just stops. I'm like, "Is this really gonna be the end of the interview?" And then he looked at me, starts laughing, and then continued talking. I was like, "Thank God."
Yeah, really great sense of humor. That's very Pete-like right there.
That's awesome. And then Jimmy, you've been there for his entire tenure with the Lake Monsters. Tim, you joined pretty late. How did he make you both feel welcome in your own ways when you first got there?
Yeah. So when I first got the call in midsummer of 2021, because I joined, halfway through, I remember I was just eating at a restaurant with one of my buddies. He gave me a call and was like, "Can you get here tomorrow? You're in the lineup." I'm like, "Get here tomorrow?" Like, holy crap. Yeah, sure, I'm there. So I remember driving up to Vermont and I was literally in the lineup just like he said. But I remember him like going out of his way to meet me way before early work started that day, just to make sure I felt comfortable in the whole Lake Monster system, and kind of showed me the ropes, introduced me some of the leaders on the team, where I met Tyler and Colby and guys like that, to kind of show me the ropes. Yeah, so he really made me feel welcomed and kind of introduced Lake Monsters baseball to me, and yeah, went running from there.
Yeah, my situation is a little bit different. I got there at the beginning of the season in 2022. I think I was the first one to get there on the first day because we had already been knocked out of the tournament. So I met Pete right when I walked in. I was the first one. He told me pick whatever locker you want, and I put my stuff down. And he was like, "You don't want to be there," like giving me like all these reasons why not to choose a certain locker. And no, I was fortunate enough. He put me in the lineup, had me start in the second game of the season, and from there on, you know, like was able to be there to help me improve outing to outing, and basically just be somebody that you can talk baseball about and always make you feel like you're an important part of the team.
And Jimmy, we've talked to you in the past about your selection of Fly Me to the Moon and how much the fans love it. What was Pete's reaction to Fly Me to the Moon?
Yeah, Pete absolutely loved it. He thought it was like the funniest thing ever at first, because it's kind of like a song that you wouldn't really expect someone to choose. So when I first went up there with that, whatever my first game was, kind of threw Pete like for a loop. He was like, "That's pretty cool." Like, yeah. So Pete ran with it, loved it, and he was also the guy who came up with the nickname the Mayor. I don't know if you guys knew that or not.
I did not.
That
That's
was
so funny.
Yeah, that was all Pete. I remember one day there was a bunch of like Burlington press, I guess, interviewing me during one of the early work sessions or BP and kind of drawing me away from getting my outfield reps in. So Pete was like, kind of like looked at me and smiled and like yelled out like, everyone wants to talk to him. He's got to be the mayor of Burlington. And then like from there it kind of just ran off with it. Yeah, so that mayor of Burlington thing was all Pete, and then the fans kind of did the rest from there.
And you guys have both talked about his extensive baseball mind. What's the best advice that he's given each of you?
Yeah,
Jim, you want
yeah, you want me to go first? Yeah, sure. That's a great question. Best baseball advice from Pete. Honestly, just play the game. I remember he would just we would have this phrase of if you're in the box and say for example you got to move a runner or there's a man on third, one out or less than two outs, he would yell out play the game from the dugout, and that was just a sign to do whatever you can to get that guy in or move that guy over to help the team. Like Pete was so team oriented, which really helped me grow as a baseball player because he for one he coached at Georgetown for such a long time, so he's obviously got incredible extensive baseball knowledge. So when he yelled like play the game, it was just like the big game of baseball is like already so hard as it is. You don't need to do too much. Like this is a team game. Like so when I'm yelling play the game at you guys, it's like do whatever you can to pass the bat to the next guy and do whatever you can to help the team win. So kind of just play the game, have fun with it, and let the game come to you. That's probably the best advice I've ever given to me.
For me, one of the things that I've always learned from him is after talking about some outings, he'd always be on like the simplify mindset. I'd come to him talking about outings, and I'd be talking about a million different things, whether it's certain pitches here and there, what I felt in my motion, or like what I was thinking with runners on base. And it was a huge like simplify your mindset and focus on the hitter. And one of the things that he implemented because of a little bit of my overthinking was grading runners. I believe it was A, B, and C runners. So I would basically know who I need to pay attention to on the bases and who I wouldn't have to. And like that has completely changed how I pitched over the past couple of years. Is him helping me understand when I need to be quick to the plate and when I can take my time and not worry about the runners.
That's awesome. And we talked about his baseball mind, and we've had a couple already, but I want to get both of your best stories of Pete Wilk before we wrap up.
Best stories. There's so many here. Well, I think two of them that come to mind. It was actually my first game in 2022. This is like opening day, so end of May or whatever the opening day is. I was hitting third in the lineup that day, and the first two guys got on. and Pete, like, I guess, or there was miscommunication between the third base coach and Pete and giving the signs, because it was like our first game or whatever. So the third base coach ended up putting the bunt sign on for me on like opening day and first and second. And like, I mean, I'm not thinking of anything. I'm just going to do what the coach is telling me to do. Like, doesn't really matter. Like, yeah, sure, I'll get it down, get the two guys over. So I bunted, ended up getting a single out of it because I think I like put down like a really sick bunt. And got a single out of it. And Pete, for like 5 innings straight, came up to me like telling me how like it was a mess up and like it was his fault, like that I was never supposed to be bunting, and he like felt so bad about it. And I was just like, Pete, like, it's fine, like I'm doing my job, I'm doing I mean, I ended up getting a hit out of it anyways, and we ended up scoring like 5 runs that inning, but he like felt so bad about it. And I was like, yeah, like this is fine, like I don't know what's the big deal out of it. But it was kind of just Pete's baseball mind kind of speaking right there. Like, it's opening day in the first inning, like my first at bat of the Futures League, he's having me sack bunt. He's like, no, we're never ever doing that. That was completely my fault. Like, don't worry about that at all. So that's kind of funny. The second story I have real quick is I remember like he would give some of the main starters an off day every week. So there was like a real off day and then like a sort of off day. And I remember we were playing at Brockton, and he was like, no, this is like your real off day. Like, you're never coming into this game, like no matter what. And I remember I kept like jabbing at him, like, yo, like I'm ready to hit. Like, come on. And he's like, no, real off day, Jim, you're not playing. So I was like, okay, whatever. And then we had another, the next week we played Worcester in probably one of my most memorable games as a Lake Monster. It was Star Wars night and I was not in the lineup. And he was like, this is like a sort of off day. Like, there's a good chance you're going to get in. And I was like, okay, cool. We were down, I think like 5 runs or something. And, it's like the 7th inning, and you could like feel his presence, like walking over to you. Like he always says like, Evan, swing a bat, or like in like the Pete voice, you could like feel him like walking towards you. So I'm like, I see him in my peripheral and like kind of see him coming over, and I'm like, all right, I'm ready. And that at bat was like I hit a pinch hit 3-run homer and in the Star Wars night. And he was like, see, that's what a sort of off day is, Jimmy. Like, now you know, like you're always ready to come in. This is not like Brockton, like where you had to sit the whole game. So that, like, not only was that one of my most memorable Lake Monsters moments for myself, but something I'll never forget. Like Pete kind of laughing that off, telling me like, this isn't Brockton. Like you might get into this game. And I was like, okay.
I remember when you hit that home run, it was sold out too. The place went absolutely nuts. It was electric. But I guess one of my favorite memories of Pete is less like a specific moment, but more like happened over the course of the season. Everybody loves Finch as a pitching coach, as a guy. I'm a Northeast guy. Never really heard many Southern accents in my life. And Finch has this real deep Southern accent. And I just remember like certain times hanging around Pete and just kind of poking Finch's buttons and trying to get a reaction out of him. And it worked every time. There'd always be something that either Pete or I would say kind of jokingly to Finch, see his reaction and get him chuckling in his deep Southern laugh. So those were probably some of my favorite memories of hanging out with Pete.
Yeah, those are some great stories, and couldn't be any 2 better stories than that. That's great.
Oh yeah.
Another thing about Pete, he would drink like a gallon of purple Powerade like every single game. Like it was like the only thing the guy drank. It was actually hilarious. Never water. It was like purple Powerade, like filled up in like a water jug. He would put this like powder in to like form it, and we would always give him make fun of him for that.
That's awesome. Well, for the purple Powerade drinking Pete WIlk, would love the stories that you guys told. Jimmy and Tim, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for having us.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Well, Jimmy and Tim wrapped up an unbelievable episode here. We heard so many great stories about a great man. Thank you all so much for taking the time to listen today. Thank you so much to the Lake Monsters community for all that they've done to help raise money for Pete and his family. Thank you to Joe, CJ, Matt Fincher, Morgan Brown, Chris English, Freda Tutt, Jeff Kleiner, Colby Brouillette, Tyler Favretto, Jimmy Evans, and Tim Noone for joining us today. This has been Back to the Futures. We hope to see you guys real soon. And Pete, we love you, man. Thank you.